Hello, welcome to Loremaster's Lair. I'm your Loremaster, here today for a bit of book ending. Right before Orc Month, we looked at Qadira. Now today, we are looking at its rival, Taldor, a nation with a long history, which once expanded across the whole of Avastan, with attempts to reach elsewhere in Garund and even Tianxi. Those people from school who think that they are better than you just because. So it's an hour-long video because of everything I'm going to need to cover, so let's dive in. So to start, let's look at the history of the region. The region was originally settled by one of a group of Azlanti who managed to survive Earthfall. They were pushed east by Orcs and Khelids, intermarried with Khelids and Gurundi, and eventually found their way to a land which was mostly uninhabited. They developed various city-states and, like so many at the time, just worked to survive. However, years later, after the sun returned, these city-states all found a leader, Taldor, the first king. Conquering his strongest neighbors with arms and his weak with food, he managed to unify the scattered cities, and then lived long enough to make them wish to stay as one. There were some squabbles in the early years, some talk of rebellions, but early Talden managed to keep the entire empire connected through highly developed roads and other infrastructures, which kept the people satisfied and gave the armies an easy way to go to those who were not pacified by such. However, as their neighbor Qadira grew, and they started to have wars with them, they looked at the entire Khelish Empire and decided that if they were to stand the test of time, they needed to be more than what they already were. So came the armies of expansion. These exploration teams are a large part of Talden history, and one may say the center stone of it. So let's go through all 7 of the 8 expeditions. We will get to the last one in a moment. The first unified the lands into what is currently Taldor, as well as created the first of Taldor's vassal states, Gault. The second tried to circle Lake Incarnate, but they were stopped by the Orcs and the Khelids, who called the future area of Malthun and Nemathus their home. The third managed to rectify this, giving control of the entirety of the lakeshore, minus drama, which these resources fail to mention, even though they have that one spot on it that Taldor never was in control of, and also most of the land of President Cheliax. The fourth pushed in closer to drama, conquering much of northern Andoran and Isgor. Well, Isgor continued to rebel, but that which kept going on until the 7th Army of Exploration managed to pacify it, but officially it was Talden at the time. As for the editor explorations in the meantime, the 5th conquered the region which would one day become the River Kingdoms, and the 6th tried and failed to gain a foothold in Garund. However, around the time of these final conquests, the beginning of the end of Taldor began. First, elves returned to Golarion, retaking Kionin and cutting the empire off from everything north of Gault. Then the plague known as the Choking Death greatly depopulated Taldor itself. Then fools who thought to control dragons with an orb of dragonkind caused all metallic dragons in the region to go out of control, an event known as the Dragon Plague. This is not to say this era was without its glories. This was also the era of the Shining Crusade, the efforts of mostly Taldor against the Whispering Tyrant, which led to the establishment of another Talden nation, Lastwall. However, this would be the last such nation, at least in Avastan. After years of peace with Kadira, the southern nation attacked, leading to the war known as the Grand Campaign. However, Taldor would be faced with two wars, though the second was bloodless. The event known as the Even-Tongued Conquest would see all of Taldor's colonies break away, with Cheliax, Isgar, Andoran, and Galt breaking away into one nation, and Lastwall breaking away by default for taking neither side. Taldor had no time to mourn its nation's losses as it continued its war with Kadira, which continued up until a few years before the death of Eredin. However, before the death of Eredin, one other important event happened, which is today's first side tangent, the part of the show where old glories are reclaimed and celebrated. Today's side tangent is Amanandar, a nation of Tianxi. However, it is a new nation, and one founded by Taldens. Some Taldens acknowledged the decline of their homeland, and worked to find a way to revitalize it. To this end, an 8th army of exploration was formed. They set sail to find new land to conquer, and eventually, after almost impossible naval feats, the army found itself in Tianxi, by the city of Kamikobu. With the breaking of the Empire of Longwu, various different groups fought to take control of this small village and its thriving fields. The 8th Army, however, arrived just in time to fight them all off and take the village for themselves, changing the village name to New Apara, and eventually conquering the surrounding lands to create their own nation of Amandar. Amandar, there's two ands in a row. This city, technically part of the Talden Empire, is an important power player in the center of the Dragon Kingdoms, with its powerful military and everything. Now, if this history set, who lives in Taldor? Well, the Taldens. Another human ethnicity off the list. I'm getting closer to going through all the main ones, but let's focus on today's side of things. Taldens have naturally bronze skin and long, flowing, darkish hair. Eyes are usually green, brown, gray, or amber in color. They are considered attractive to most humans, helped by their love of staying up to date with the latest fashions, not helping with the general arrogance which is invariably found across most members of the ethnicity. Sure, it helps them with their bravery and their confidence when they can accomplish anything, but they ignore any suggestions that their country is in decline or that others might be superior in something. Most Taldens cope by living in decadence. If they appear to still be the greatest in the world, that is obviously the same as actually being the greatest, right? Taldens love dueling. It's always a way to prove one's honor, and just became a way for them to have fun. There are a variety of styles, but the one currently most popular is Rondolero, a style based off the techniques taken from the Kellishes during the war. They also love politics to a disappointing level. My own feelings aside, they love courtly pageantry and political machinations, and bureaucracy is the bureaucracy in whatever country they live in, they always try to work their way into the system. After all, leadership is their birthright. So they excel in making both strong rules and mastering all the backhand deals. Backhanded deals are especially a must to get anywhere in Talden society. For even the lowliest peasant to marry, they need to outwit their rivals and put on the most decadent weddings to get anywhere close to happy marriage. When it comes to everyone else, Most human ethnicities include their close cousins, the Chelaxians, who some still view with suspicion after the Eventon conquest. Helids, many of whom probably count themselves citizens after their ancient homelands were conquered. Kelishites, still viewed with suspicion from the many wars with Kadira. Orphans, who are mostly descendants of the orphan god or Africans or such. And the Grandi, with many noble families intermarrying with nobles from their trade partners in Osirian. For non-humans, dwarfs and halflings are respected, or at least more so than in Cheliax. Elves are sometimes unwelcome sights, them being reminders of the lost land to Kionin. Gnomes most live in the Verduran forest, a place which the Empire has mixed feelings on. For more minor groups, the country's past association with Eredin has led to a small population of Ozenketi and Asimirs to call the nation home. Moving into government, Taldor has been ruled by an emperor since the country's origin. Until recently, that emperor has been Stavian III. Much more recently, and spoilers for the War of the Crown adventure path, it has gone to his daughter, Entropia, the first time a woman has inherited the throne. Though it was not easy. Again, adventure path. However, even if the emperor is in control, they are not in complete control. Those who try to run all the country themselves rather than just focus on a few things that tend to create more mess than it cleans up. There is an entire bureaucracy of nobles across the provinces, who again are the ones who really decide whether people find themselves in a peaceful village or forced to toil endlessly to make a nobleman fat. The highest of these noblemen are those upon the Senate, some 222 nobles of hereditary titles who make most of the actual decisions. Technically, the emperor is in a position to fill empty seats when the Senate leaves one opened for one reason or another, but this tends to be done sparingly and strategically. So next up, we have our long tradition of looking at the different regions that the country is divided into, starting with the capital, Opara, and the actual province it's a part of, Oparos. This is the place one will find the richest in the country, with the throne and the senate and the nobles who call it a chunk of the city their territory, or live here instead of the places they actually rule. It is also home to the poorest, those beggars who fight for even at the table scraps of the nobles' plate, an urban sprawl with little actual purpose. That said, it is the center of the country's nationalism, to the point where even the thieves proclaim themselves loyal Taldens and want to counter any foreign intrigue from getting in the way of their superior intrigue, making Opara one of the few inner-sea capitals without Skrazny presence. The region does have its small towns, Kozan being the main trade hub with Absalom, Mott being home to the largest lighthouse in the area. Old Zahir is not actually an old town, but actually a fake ruins made many years back, which people ignored at first, just loudly proclaiming how much they knew about the historic city, and how their families once had great influence there, and other ways of clearly ignoring the truth because they're Taldens. However, it is the capital of Opara which itself shines the brightest. Sure, there is crime and widespread poverty, but they are poor people. If only they applied themselves. But under the leadership of a former Ufengard member, or the often royal position of the city's baron, for exceptional service, Opara is home to the War Ministry, the Kithodian Academy, the world's largest temple to Eredin, and the Rhapsodic College. It is also home to our second side tangent, Lion Blades, These are masters of infiltration, espionage, and if needed, assassination, trained specifically to work for the good of Taldor and its rulers. They're specifically trained in what is known as shadow schools, located in Apara and Casimir. We specifically know locations of two, under the above-mentioned places of Chthonian Academy and Rhapsody College, with only the leaders of the Lion's Blade knowing where the location of all of them are. Things that make them different from similar chalet traditions is their training at using crowds to their advantage, whether it be to move through or hide in them, or, to use them as unknowing allies to flank. They also know some simple bardic performances and are masters of disguises, who can bluff those they try to eliminate so well that they make them think that they just imagined the blade that was at their throat a moment ago. Going back to places, just south of Opara, along the coast, is Moda. Here you will find a bustling maritime industry supporting the Talden Imperial Navy. Navy and fishing are the centers of this province, and nothing else, to the detriment of the more inland cities. At Taldor's height, there was a vast irrigation system which allowed the region to produce bountiful harvests. However, after years of everything going into fishing and the navy, much of the old farmland now lies barren. The region's ruler, Grand Duke Nestor Delvidia, managed to get his position through naval achievement. Just another instance showing that if you work hard enough, you can make it far in Talden. The old song and dance. The capital city of the region is the city of Galsifar, where the Imperial Navy is housed, along with having a massive shipyard with which to conduct fishery and trade, to the point half of the population comes and goes by ships every day. However, the city of Merciful Bay to the north is larger, though still just as reliant on fishing. It is a city said to be protected by angels, and one of the centers of worship of the Imperial Lord, Yilimancha. Which brings us to side tangent number 3. I usually like to space these out, but here we are. Guess I could have technically moved the line blade to Casimir. Whatever. Yilimancha, Imperial Lord of coastal waters, fisherfolk, and flying creatures. Have we had this Imperial Lord in depth in any source before? No. Is this the second time we are mentioning this specific one, and therefore they deserve recognition as a semi-regular guest? Yes. Yilimancha typically appears in 2 different forms: a woman with the head of an osprey, or a seagull with the head of a Vasarian woman. She has been in constant war with Pazuzu since the dawn of time, over who rules over each winged creature. She teaches people how to fish, and how to do so without taking too much, and in general protects all humans who live upon the shores. Her home is a golden aviary upon the Skywards Cliffs in Nirvana. Moving slightly further east is Lingyan. This is a province which historically had little importance, just being a minor farming province. However, up north, the demand for food has run the traditional breadbaskets dry. To remedy this, for the last few generations, more and more major farming operations have been beginning to produce in this region, bringing to the area plenty of new money and corruption. Well, it's Taldor. It was already corrupt, but Lingyan barons could not really do anything that big when it was just a small-scale province. Now the nobles, under Grand Duke Morian Zelvirgian, run locals off their lands and allow smuggling through their territories in order to get as much money in their pockets as possible. The capital is Elsecope, which sits on the corners between Lingyan and two of its neighbors, Ligos and Koza. The northern corner, it sits on the northern corner, so it will take a while for us to actually get to those other two. Elliscorp is 2 days river travel from Opara, but until recently this was too distant for most cozy city nobles to actually pay a visit to it. Now the city works to rapidly grow to fit the taste of these visitors, often to the detriment of those who are trying to keep up with the times. Before we worry about the north, we still have a bit to go around the south first. So going around the four corners, the place I like to call the Corruption Square, the second would be Safra. Safra is marked by being the front lines for the wars between Taldor and Kadira, with military servants mandatory to all families. Over the years, this is the region that has changed hands the most between the two countries. Much of the supplies comes from outside the province, as not to give farms lands to their enemies if the region is ever kept conquered. The capital is the region of Zimar, which stands both as an enormous fortress, destroyed and built 1,000 times, as well as the home of the Talden Phaliax, the main foot soldiers of the empire. It should also be noted that most people of Zimar are at least part Kelish, though they have no loyalties to Kadira. The province is traditionally ruled both by the local Grand Duke, but also by the High Strategos, because it's really important for the military, which often gives you leaders like Eugenius Volbelar, who lets all decisions be handled by the High Strategos. A position we last heard of was filled by Maxillar Felarius, which we know is a time long past. Next up, the other southernmost region, White March. This region, like Safra, has changed hands repeatedly over the centuries. However, while Safra is relatively flat, White March is mountainous, which makes advance or retreat difficult. The mountain has also led to the region being overall cut off from the rest of the empire, especially during the winter months, when nations can literally be cut off due to snowfall. That said, they are mostly fine with it and do not really care who they pay their taxes to, as long as their said ruler leaves them relatively alone. The province's capital is Po, a small town which is little more than a way station between the various military bases and another of the region's famous landmarks, the Monastery of the Seven Forms, which is a monastery built far away from the monks' homeland of Tianxi, to force potential students to learn while they traveled across Kazmiran before they reached it. The Grand Duchess of White March is Vilvelix Dalahan, a soldier who was forced to come home with the death of her siblings, and who honestly would rather be back on the battlefield. And finishing the square, we have the Ligos. Ligos is a land which is mainly used for grazing, and is therefore a place one will mostly find cows and sheep over fields. However, this is not what the region is known for. It is known for horses. It is here Talden's claim their ancestors were the first to domesticate horses, and the rich started to get themselves a horse from one of these stables. Special mention of such goes to the Stabian Ranch, which has been in the royal family for generations, and Shershine Ranch, who claims to have bred the first Talden war horses. The capital is Avastan, a small town whose only claim to fame is, you guessed it, breeding horses. However, more important is the town of Ortalaka, a town built right in the square where the four provinces intersect, and therefore serves as neutral grounds to Well, again, I call it Corruption Square for a reason. Mercenaries, smugglers, and river pirates, this town is considered neutral ground for the South's various criminal elements. Near the town is home to Grand Duchess Desdelita Solari, however, a recent holder of the office after exposing the wrongdoings of the former holder. Charges many agree were made up. However, as she sits in her ranch at Theomore, she has yet to make her next big move now that she is in control of the region, leaving many to question why she thought it was worth it to do so in the first place. Finally, going a step north, we have Porthmos, one of the largest prefectures in the nation. The main striking feature of the region is the Porthmos Gap, a gap in the Wall Edge Mountains which serve as the quickest path to the Whistling Plains, the land feature which separates Taldor from the nations of Kashmirun. The gap was said to have been created when the terrace came from Kashmirun, but we have more to talk about than geological features. The main river, another geological feature, divides the prefecture into three. The northwest, which mines, the southwest, which farms, and the east, another section that is cut off from the typical Taldor and gets by on its own. The capital is Sardis, actually several small mining towns working under a single central government. Another important town is Karakuru, the birthplace of Taldor's favorite dueling style, Wandalero. The Grand Duke is Testro Vilesmith, a man who uses the isolation of this region to serve as a ruthless dictator. He does not run a criminal empire, but he does run a prison. When someone needs to be disappeared, they are sent to Porthmos Prison, a hole in the ground where inmates are allowed to do whatever they want, where guards only keep watch along the gaping maw to ensure no one gets out. Taking a step west, we have found ourselves circling around because we're now between Porthos and Aperanos. Here is Kuzan. Kuzan is the traditional breadbasket of the country, to the point where every other artistic or industrial attempts in the region died out, and many attempts to create urban centers lay in ruins. Most of the nobles of this region do not even live here, preferring to live in Opera. Many, including Grand Duchess Melia Denzani, do keep country estates here, her own being Trenchelwan. This hunting lodge has always been the home of the region's rulers, being both the place to have opulent parties, as well as the level of political intrigue keeping control of the largest food-producing region of the country necessitates. Melia, for her part, has kept up the tradition of galas and political conspiracy. The actual capital of the region is Kuzan City, a place known for being half empty and another quarter burned to the ground. Showing a good example of the region's urban centers, actually. Other places of note are Eagle's Head, a town built around a small amphitheater, and one of the successful places where artists and smugglers flourish. And also Pegador, the ruins of an Azlanti underground city, which may be connected to one of their deities, Gull. Which, of course, brings us to our first side tangent. Azlanti deity Skull, the god of annihilation, catharsis, and purity. He was a deity who taught his followers the best way to purify oneself is to get really, really angry. He was not a man of ridding himself of inner turmoils by promote purity, but of harnessing the anger to destroy the offending source. His priests recruited from those who were let down by the world, promising to help them create a better one. But Skull's most famous proclamation was that, when humanity had fully disappointed him, he would come down on the world and wipe the surface clean, starting everything over from scratch. Obviously, after Earthfall, he kind of lost much of his support. As one can see, he still has some faithful hidden away, but by and large his faith has been largely forgotten. Now that we have finally finished with the south, let's now turn north of Apara and head towards Taldor. These plains were once a fertile forest, but overharvesting has left the area one with depleted soil and twisted shrubs, and of course swampland. The Blackwood Swamp is one which has continued to grow, approaching the capital of Casimir. While the city has kept its growth at bay, land travel can be difficult. Casimir, for its part, is a small city, but what one would think of when not exactly what one would think of when they imagine the opulence of Taldor. But under the creeping vines sits one of the most widely known shipyards in all of the inner sea region. It being at the position it is a small price to pay to have one of the most secure landing positions, while also having little in the way of support if it is taken. Though lack of support has caused problems in the past, especially when the former Grand Duke was exposed as fraud and who got his position through lies, and he was summarily executed in riots. Riots which are all too close to the nation of gold. Current Grand Duchess Ciceri Tiberan has worked to spread propaganda against violence, trying to convince the people vigilante violence was justified in just that one instance, and to keep all ideas of revolution out of their heads. Next is Aries, which stretches between the Veteran Forest and the World Edge Mountains. It is one of the largest provinces, which has led both to the ideal of isolationism as well as infighting between the various groups, with different baronies sometimes erupting into bloody battles for trifling reasons. The leader, Grand Duke Borden Herculor, does what he can to keep the fighting from interrupting the lumber and mining industries, not siding with any side as long as trade continues. That said, he is not a favorite of nobility, him having married a dwarf and allowed the blood into a noble family. Talents. But dwarfs do make up a large portion of the province's capital, Mahito, where they are encouraged to sail to help with the mining. Now north of the Veteran Forest, we have northern Pembac. The province's position has made it isolated from the rest of Taldor, but also made it an ideal trade partner of gold, which used to be a booming industry before, well, gold. So now it is a region housing displaced Galton nobles and which needs military protection against small bands of brigands. The region, mostly rural, is home to many more wild beasts than the rest of Taldor, and therefore is a nice place for trophy hunters to spend a week to burying themselves a hippogriff. The leader of this province is Grand Duchess Beatiza Falspeth, an interesting person as a Talden who hates politics. She is close to her people because of her royal holdings, and she actually works for their benefit. But does she hate politics? This has led to her gaining interest in the democracy of nearby Andaman, and she collects writings of that nation. The capital is the trade city of Scathena, which is a ghost town in the winter but a bustling marketplace in the summer. Other landmarks in this sparse territory include took over, a hunting lounge ruled by 12 white sisters, who help lost women, and Tragan, a city sitting on the border of Gault, which is where many of the disposed nobles have taken refuge. Finally, the largest province is Avon, the northwesternmost province. The place is primarily home to farmers and ranchers, being our third breadbasket of the evening. And Yamas, the providential capital, adds artisans to the mix. The city is sometimes known as the Tent City because of its traveling traders who make camp around its walls to sell their wares annually, many coming from traders across Kazmaran. The city is also home to the third branch of Taldor's military, the Talden horses, which is the unoriginally named cavalry, so they do ride both horses and elephants. They mainly patrol the border and kill the many monsters who call the spirit whilst reaching their home, but the nation's roads allow them to travel quickly anywhere they are needed. The current Grand Duke is the former commander of the horse, Brous Renginan, who is currently having a secret affair with the current leader of the horse. Now we are done with prefectures. But now we have provinces. I hope I've been keeping that straight all this time. Anyway, there are various provinces, but several of the lands Taldor currently does not own but refuses to admit as such. Others are smaller, like the Fog Mountains or a half-mile wide island of Danorath. No, let me read that again. Danothar. This is why I keep all the names on there. There are two large enough to mention, however. Verduran and World's Edge. First, Verduran in the east is half of the Verduran Forest, the other half, of course, going to Andoran. Like its neighbor, the nation only nominally holds control of the region, and the forest itself is, for all intents and purposes, its own independent entity. The forest is home to various killer druids, who ought to keep the forest's health. The Wildwood druids brokered a peace with Taldor in the past, and worked to deliver wood in exchange for keeping Talden out. That said, a gnome from the town of Wispel is promised a seat on the Senate, a position that they may hold until they get bored of politics. The other is the World's Edge Mountains. These mountains develop the eastern border of Taldor. An ill-defined border, but that side of Taldor is kind of isolationist, so they don't really care either way. The place is home to the dwarven city of Corvincus, a citadel which has depleted its resources and has not been abandoned merely because of tradition. It is also home to various Azlanti ruins, found in the legendary Valley of the Azlanti. Finally, now that we're done with geography, let's end this off with a short talk on faith. Talden's three major deities are Abadar, Caden Kalen, and Sheelan, which they refer to as the Taldor Pantheon, and usually depict as Talians. Until recently, Eredin was the greatest of their deities. We all know that story by now, and his followers have preferred to go towards arcane use instead of moving towards another god. Because Taldens love holding on to their glorious past, of course. As for evil gods, nobles tend to lean towards the decadence of Ogathoa, and the commoners prefer the destructive promises of Rovagog and Loremaster. And for minor deities in the region, we have shining examples like Kurgus, and not so shining examples like Zythus. And that's Taldor. Another long video. It's going to be over 40 minutes by the time I'm done talking. We actually have another long video coming up not too far in the future. But we have a few videos between now and then. So come back next week when we look at another god. Which is it? One we recently gained new information on. See you then.